Welcome to today's Community Infrastructures Service Committee meeting for August 31st, 2015. We do have some items on the agenda today. Councillor Galloway-Seelock moves the consent items, and we have Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, I have some questions on item number 3. I sent Council an email with my concerns. Hopefully everybody read that in advance.
Okay. Under our new guidelines, we do require to bring out a consent item for to be up for discussion. We required a motion. But before we take that, I want to. Is it just one item you want to?
Just the one item.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all those in favor of the remainder? Opposed? Those are carried. Okay. Do you want to bring forward a motion?
Yes, I'd like to bring a motion forward to discuss the purchase order extension of 206424 Roland Street Bridge replacement and the additional cost of $17,457.51. I have a number of concerns regarding this particular issue.
Okay. Do we need a seconder for that one? Or okay, I didn't think so. So, all right, all those in favor? Opposed? I guess that's carried. Go ahead. Okay,
thank you. I suppose my first question, which was answered by staff with regard to the vendors of the purchase order and the differences. So my understanding was that there was a difference that was about the same as what we're seeing here in the request for additional work. So I think what I'm concerned about, I know that I should be asking questions, but since I've had my questions answered and since I sent the information to Council, Council is aware of the fact that I'm concerned that, first of all, that it was approved without Council's approval, and that this is a process. We've had 4 extensions, PO extensions, in the last 6 months, according to Mr. Chapman. When does a tender not become a tender anymore if we are always adding additional costs? This is a precedent that we really shouldn't be approving or supporting. It is unfair to the other. I'm trying to ask a question, so I'm asking a question.
Can you please be more succinct, Councillor Fernandez?
I just want to understand the rationale, behind the increase in the additional work. I understand it was about landscaping, but when do we put the onus on the contractor vendor to do the due diligence before we approve a tender?
Mr. Taggi?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think there are 2 separate issues. One is when we award the tenders, at that time you look at the prices of the different bidders, and the qualified bids are taken into account, and the lowest bidder gets the job in most circumstances. Once you pass that stage, then the project moves into construction stage. And at that time, I think Council is correct that we have to be vigilant in terms of before we approve any additional work, we have to be certain that the additional work is such that the contractor could not have, even by doing the best due diligence, could have known the conditions that may have existed on the project. So really the onus then shifts onto the staff to make sure that before they approve any additional amounts for any contract, that staff is satisfied that the conditions that caused the cost to go up were not in control of the contractor and he could not have foreseen those. So coming back to the specific example of this bridge, from what I understand, the soil conditions under the bridge footing were unexpectedly different than what the boreholes elsewhere showed, and a contractor had every right to rely upon the information of the boreholes. Now, if the actual conditions of the soil under the footings was different from what the borehole showed, then the contractor or the staff could not have known what existed under the footings until after the footings were removed. So that's the reason for the increase in the cost. In terms of the second part of the council's question, why council was not asked in advance, I think the way the construction projects proceed, we cannot really stop a project halfway through or midway through, and so that we can get council's approval. I think I do agree with the councillor that the staff has to be very certain in their mind that what they are approving does make sense, and it is something that the contractor could not have foreseen.
Okay, thank you for that response. So my other question is, and I'll have comments if there are after any other questions have been asked, is when do we put the onus on the contractor? So just like in business, when you ask for a quote on a business particular item, so if you're printing a product, for example, let's just say it's signs, and you have unforeseen problems that increase the cost. If you go back to the customer is going to say, too bad, too sad, you should have foreseen that problem. So at what point are we going to start saying that to our contractors and vendors? Because if we continue to be an open purse, as we've seen in the last 4 PO extensions, then our tenders are not going to have the validity that they do, because vendors will see that if they under budget, that they can come back to the city to ask for additional costs.
Come back to the city for additional costs. They can only claim additional costs if they are justified based upon the fact of the case. And each case is obviously different, and depending on the circumstances. The onus, I do agree with the councillor, the onus is on the staff, and onus is on us to make sure we have qualified inspectors on the job site who are observing the construction methods and making certain that it is not something that contractor could have foreseen or controlled during the construction process before they approve any additional work.
Okay. We'll have to get back to you.
Yep.
Councillor Yaneski.
On page 2 of that report, I need a clarification as to what the exact figure of the additional work amount is. It 17,500, or in the estimate further down it talks about 15,500 and change. And then we're trying to work out the calculations of the totals. They don't add up. So help me out. What's the right answer?
Mr. Chapman.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, they're both correct. I'd refer you back to the recommendation. $15,449.12 is the amount before HST. $17,457.51 is the amount including HST.
17,000 with HST?
Included, yes.
Okay, and then when I'm looking down further down that estimate, it talks about Apico HST. It's $3,249. I don't understand where your figure comes from.
So that applicable HST would be the amount net of any HST rebates that we're entitled to. So that represents the final cost to the city net of any HST rebate.
Well, I know we get it back, but somehow when I add these, they don't add up versus the 15,000 add the 3,000 doesn't add up to the 17.5.
Because there are 2 extensions here. As you know, under the purchasing bylaw, staff has discretion up to 10% through the Director of Purchasing to extend, and so that happened in the first line. In the second line, the amount in addition to that 10% is what's before you today. So the HST that's shown there would apply to both of those amounts.
Sorry, the HST applies to both increases?
Actually, it would apply to the total tender value, so all 3 lines, the original proposal cost, the original 10% PO extension, the additional work. The amount shown there is the HST that we pay after all of our rebates are taken into account.
Okay.
Councillor Etherington?
No question, just comment, Mr. Chair.
Just comments? Okay, I'm gonna give Councillor Fernandez. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say completely support staff on this one. I don't see this as either an issue of landscaping or of the city being an open purse. I watched the bridge project start and finish. I watched the problems they ran into. I have no concerns about the project. They did an excellent job. I was going back and forth across that bridge last night. It's an excellent bridge. They did a great job, and I'd be prepared to move it.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez?
Thank you. There's no question that the work may have been well done, and that's not what I'm challenging here. What I'm challenging is the business of the tenders and the purchase orders. If we continue to see that when we accept tenders that may be low, and I understand we look at a lot of different criteria when we put forward a tender. I understand our staff does that. But if it starts to become an ongoing precedent, we're going to end up with vendors who are going to be lowballing us and coming back for one reason or another with the possibility of additional costs, whether they are realistic costs, whether they are costs that have suddenly come up. When business, the example I gave, when business tenders out a tender or a purchase order, they have to eat that cost if they make an error. And I think we have to start expecting our contractors to do the same, because a tender is part of the process that we understand how much the cost is to the taxpayer. We now see that this project is over by $37,856. That's a concern. It's $40,000 this time and $100,000 the next time. And what's going to happen at the end of the year when we're over on all these? Sure, we're going to have some capital projects that we're under, and we may be able to offset that. But is that good budgeting, and is that responsible use of our taxpayers' dollars? And that's why I'm bringing this forward. $17,000 is not a lot in the overall budget of our city, but it's a precedent that we continue to set, and I think we really need to have a better eye and take whatever we need to do to make sure that we're using taxpayers' dollars in an efficient and effective and responsible manner. I will not support this extension.
Okay. Mayor Verbanovich? Sure.
Thank you very much. I wasn't going to comment on this, but I feel I need to, because I think a scenario is being painted that staff are being irresponsible and that we're setting some sort of dangerous precedent that is going to wreak havoc for the taxpayer, and quite frankly, I don't believe that to be the case. The policy which gives that 10% leeway to staff has been in place for many, many years, and I can count probably on one hand the number of times, maybe two hands at best, in my time on council where it's had to be dealt with. Because of particular sets of circumstances that were identified during the construction process. Quite frankly, I think it would have been more problematic to stop the work, send all the equipment away, and bring it back to council, and then bring everybody back, continue the work after council approved it, and move on in that scenario. So I think staff did do their due diligence, and overall, I believe that staff and our organization are prudently use taxpayers' dollars on a regular basis.
Okay. Councillor Galloway-Seelock?
Yeah, I had no intention speaking to this as well, but again, as Mayor Verbanovic has already suggested, there's a picture being painted here that just totally is inaccurate. We have a policy, and when tenders come in and we award them, the only way there can be that PO extension or more money given is that if there's unforeseen circumstances that they can prove are there that nobody knew about beforehand. and that when you dig into something, you find it out. I liken it to a bathroom renovation, and you have a contractor and you're doing your bathroom, and they go in and they open up your walls and they realize that your pipes have started to rust and they're going to burst, and therefore it's going to cost you an extra couple $1,000 in order to finish your bathroom renovation. It's the exact same scenario, but with land in this case. And so I think we have a policy in place that makes sure that the dollars being spent are spent wisely and they are being effective and efficient, and that it can only happen when there's unforeseen circumstances that can be proven through staff. And I think it's important that we remember that when we deal with these extensions.
Okay, thank you. I'll just make one quick comment too. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, when you look at this in a big picture and the amount of tenders that we do offer in this organization, which is in the numerous amounts, to have some that go over budget or whatever is surprising me that we do have the little amount that we do. And again, it's almost impossible to have unforeseen problems without doing the full investigation, and that's just not relatively can be possible. So with that, a recorded vote has been called. All those in favor, please stand. All opposed? That's carried. Okay, we have our next item up is discussion items dealing with item number 6, the Kitchener Growth Management Strategy 2015 Annual Monitoring Report. We don't have a staff presentation, and with that, we have any questions? Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I have just a couple of questions. When going through this, just an overall question, was the new lands that were appealed through the ROP included in any of these numbers, or am I a year ahead of myself?
Through the chair, no. This report is a historical report on the last year, so no, it does not. Okay.
I kind of, as I was asking it, I kind of answered it myself. I apologize for that. The question I have on page 6-7, we have a significant percentage of the top two lines in the graph there, subdivision draft approved units that were appealed through the Ontario Municipal Board, probably for a number of different reasons. Is this starting to become a trend that we're seeing, and is that cause for concern?
Through the chair, it's not necessarily a trend. They are site-specific appeals. The Planning Act does provide for the ability for applicants or anybody for that matter to appeal. It is something that we do monitor, and it's why we track them separately.
Yeah. Is it possible to get maybe like a 5-year, 10-year history of kind of where it's going? I'm just concerned that that's a pretty high percentage of the amount, and I understand they're site-specific and they could be against the city or it could be developer versus developer, and I understand there's all kinds of different dynamics to it, but is that something that we could easily obtain?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is something we could obtain. It may take us a little bit of time. What I can say is that appeals have been a way of doing business for close to 10 years now. In this particular year, what jumps out is that we have 2 very large subdivisions, so the lot count is very, very high. And those are 2 that I believe are in the process of working their way out, so that lot count would drop significantly. And the 2 large subdivisions that have been appealed, which account for the vast majority of the units under appeal, are appeals. There was one developer against another developer. And that is one that council will be familiar with. We do have direction to settle.
Yeah, I think the larger concern was one of your comments when you said appeals seem to be more of a way of business these days, and that's concerning to me. I understand that's a comment. I won't make it later. In 6-17, we talk about, 6-16, we talk about 20,000 residential units. Do we have any way of translating that into the amount of years we have left for greenfield development growth?
Through the chair, our roughly estimated land supply for greenfield is we have approximately about 15 to 20 years.
Okay. And I believe I have just one more question. It's from page 6-18, and it talks about intensification and then designated greenfield area densities. How do we get more jobs out to growth areas quicker? How do we get that to increase faster?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the best we can do is plan for them and hope that market forces do take place to allow it. We have a lot of new areas that are not at the core, that have large areas of employment, and we are planning for higher density employment. And when those plans materialize, and there always is a lag between non-residential uses and residential uses in greenfield development, but in the fullness of time, we do expect that to be realized.
Is that something that we can, just to follow up on that, is that something that we can look at trying to help industry quicken that? I don't know how to go about doing that, but is that something that we can look at moving forward? We just have certain areas of the city that have had development for a number of years, and the homes have been there, 10 plus years in some cases, and we have zero commercial or retail. So it's really not walkable. Is there anything within our policies that we can look at to try and assist in helping some of that move forward quicker?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we'll take a look at that. I think we have plenty of planning policies that align with all of our economic development initiatives. But as a follow-up to the question, we'll have a look to see if there's something we can do.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. I have a number of questions, so I may go over. So just starting with 6-8 and the residential development rates. This is in the built-up area. So we've seen a dramatic increase on the multiple development. My understanding in reading this, there's mainly those Drulo buildings on Fallowfield and Old Cairns that have bumped it up so significantly. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's partially what contributed to the large number.
Okay. So we're seeing not as many single detached in the built-up area. Do we have a sense of an understanding of why that is? I mean, is that because, I'm sort of throwing it out there, is it because the built-up area is mainly made up of single and semis already, and it would mean a demolition to add a single or a semi?
Through the chair, that's generally correct. There aren't a lot of larger tracts of land within the built-up area that can be further subdivided. So a lot of new lot creations are through consents, which is where you'd mainly see some additional single detached dwellings.
Okay. In the numbers where you're talking about designated greenfield, this is 6-10. I'm happy to see that we're getting closer to a 50-50 split. Will we see it rise higher in the built-up areas over the coming 5 years? Because we've heard time and time again from operations that development does not pay for development. So are we seeing a push from our staff and encouragement from staff to have more development in our built-up areas?
Through the chair, we like to monitor on a 5-year average, not necessarily look at it annually. It provides a more accurate reflection of what is actually occurring. So our 5-year average intensification level is actually 48%. Mm-hmm. Generally, through our growth management program, so our KGMP, we do focus our attention on priorities within the built-up area and in intensification areas in particular.
Okay. When I'm looking at the graphs that were measuring the existing measures, current intensification on 6-12, you talk about residents plus jobs, and Councillor Galloway-Seelock alluded to this question as well, is how is that translating to jobs? If we are building further out, but there's no additional jobs, and she asked that we look into that a bit more. How is that number realistic, though, if we're not actually getting the jobs per hectare?
Through the chair, we are actually getting jobs. At this early stage of development at the periphery, the ratios aren't where we want to be, but we do feel that we are planning for it, and we'll get there eventually. Perfect example, the Rosenberg community. So that's our largest, newest greenfield area that was master planned. That neighborhood, that community is planned to actually achieve the density target. So we have a broad cross-section of different employment categories, and there are prototypical densities for each employment category, and we have those distributed in such a way to help us get there. But what we do know from past experience is that residential is always what goes in first, especially for those employment uses that are dependent on having a certain threshold of population in place, whether it be a school. A school does create some jobs, low yield per hectare, by the way. But for example, commercial retail development especially will not speculate and be in ahead of residential. It actually waits pretty close to full build out before it goes there. And the fact that we are also targeting even higher density office use in some of these areas, so people can avoid the trips to the few destination areas for offices in the city. That's going to take a little bit more time yet, but we do feel we're going to get there. Some of those office uses and other employment uses are dependent on having sufficient transit availability, and the transit will only go there once the population is there as well.
Okay. And I hear constantly in my ward, especially Ward 4, we really have minimal commercial, and everything has to be driven to. We're continuing to expand out to New Dundee Road, and the constant complaint is there's not enough commercial, there's not enough amenities. Do we actively pursue? I think you're essentially answering my question already when you said that we are trying to get there, we're going to get there. Can you give me a timeline as to when we're going to get there? And I know my time is up, so I'll cue back in.
Very, very quickly, through you, Mr. Chair, for Rosenberg, we figured 10 to 15 years. That is what our past experience. There are already some employment uses that are taking place, but in terms to reach its full potential, we're figuring 10 to 15 years. Dune South is a little bit different, because that was not master planned by the city initiated. That is one that, of course, was approved through the Ontario Municipal Board. There are some small pockets of employment. It's not as balanced as Rosenberg is, at least in the planned way, but there are some. There are little nodes in neighborhood service commercial areas that are planned, and some of those will take place, but we won't achieve the numbers and the targets that we are hoping for citywide in Dune South. And the one commercial shopping area that we have, which is the Pioneer Park, is well used because of the reasons that you described.
Thank you. I have some more questions when everybody else.
Okay. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
I think it's there's a reason why it's Councillor Fernandez and myself sometimes asking these questions when it comes to the growth management with our areas growing fairly rapidly. One question that just dawned on me that has been brought to my attention recently, within Rosenberg specifically, there's residential areas that are designated mixed use, right? That could go either full residential or could be a mixed, I'll get to the broader policy question in a minute, that are mixed use that could go full residential or a mixed residential commercial. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from the community is that a lot of those designated areas have the potential to go full residential, which take away some of that commercial retail, because it is becoming very difficult through our policies and guidelines to actually meet all the requirements that we have in place. So it's easier to go for residential. Is that something that we can look at in the short term to see if there's any decisions that need to be made with regards to the commercial retail policy and guidelines?
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, certainly something we can look into, and I think maybe a follow-up with the councillor would be worthwhile to understand the full nature of the issue. We did make assumptions on what the capture rate would be for employment and residential in those mixed-use areas, and we did develop those assumptions with the full understanding or the expectation that a high percentage would initially go to residential. A lot of the uses are zoned in such a way that they could transition from residential to some commercial uses should the demand pick up at a later time. And we have actually seen that happen in more established parts of the community.
Just something to be concerned about from my perspective if we're going to hit some of these targets, especially that we've set for Rosenberg. So that's all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. So Councillor Galloway-Seelock already asked about the numbers for the region, and so we'll be waiting for that according to the report. You've talked about that. Do we have some understanding about what the implications could be on that decision on our planning process and our infrastructure planning and the costs?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, we don't have a complete understanding of all of the implications, but one thing we do know at this point is that moving forward, and it may not immediately take place or be felt in next year's monitoring report, but in monitoring reports down the road, it will be a greater challenge to actually maintain the same level of intensification that we have. Very simply explained is that if your greenfield supply is not growing and you are getting a lot of development in your built-up area, you're going to get a good, healthy percentage of development that happens within the built-up area. If you're adding a whole bunch of supply to your greenfield, it is actually going to have an overall dilution effect on the percentage of units that are constructed within the built-up area. Municipalities that have no greenfield have 100% built up. It's really only municipalities that have some greenfield that have to put planning programs in place to try and manage the situation. We will encounter some slippage as a result of that settlement.
Okay. You answered to Councillor Galloway-Seelock that you saw that we had about 15 to 20 years worth of supply of greenfield development yet, right? I think that's now
through the chair. That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, and that doesn't include the possibly released areas from the ROP, right?
Through the chair. That's also correct.
Okay, so if we have that amount of greenfield development yet available, 10, 15, not including the one, do you see, and we run into this every time we have growth management, we fill up with a lot of development industry who are crying the blues because they, it's me first, me first, me first. Do we see that the way we are moving now, in a very systematic and very planned, using master plans like Rosenberg, that we're going to have developers knocking and complaining that they're not getting their just opportunity in the coming season? I know it's a really big question, and it's kind of it begs for some speculation on your part, but I think the message needs to be sent out to the development industry that we have 15 to 20 years worth of supply, and that if we continue to work in a logical and planned way that staff has been doing with the Rosenberg as a good example, can we sort of hold them at bay?
So through the chair, we will continue to utilize the tools that we have been using, the Kitchener Growth Management Plan being one, for example, on how we plan and prioritize our growth and our growth areas. And we will continue to use a master planning approach similar to Rosenberg for new greenfield development areas in the future.
Okay, that was, I understand my question was probably pretty broad and your answer was pretty vague, so maybe I should be more clear. How can we send the message out to the development industry that it's better for this community, this city, to follow a logical, planned process in conjunction with our Kitchener Growth Management Plan, than to continually leapfrog over development so that we end up with a Dune South situation instead of a Rosenberg planned community situation? How do we get that message out, and what maybe as council can we do to support that?
Yeah. Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. I think we have very clear policies and a very rigorous process that actually makes that statement very clearly. It can be reinforced when we are presenting the biannual growth management plans to council, and there are people who are in the gallery. If that is something that members of committee and council choose to do. It is a little bit early to know exactly what the full implications are of having all of these additional lands added to our greenfield supply. We will have to evolve our process in all likelihood to accommodate a supply that wasn't foreseen until very recently. And although we have no idea, because we have not heard directly from those landowner development interests, I would not be surprised if we continue to get landowners who are going to speak strongly in support of their own developments and to try and have them arrive to the finish line as quickly as possible. That is something that we are all used to encountering.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate the challenges that you guys are dealing with, and how you are trying to work so diligently on keeping master plans moving forward. When there's time for comments, I'll have some comments.
Okay. Do we have a mover first of all? Okay. Councillor Galloway-Seelock. Councillor Fernandez, you want to ring in for comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Councillor Galloway-Seelock had comments too, but... Okay, all right. That just the tail end of my where I was starting to go into comments was one of the challenges that I've seen in the 5 years I've been sitting here is when the development industry comes and sits in the gallery and then, makes everybody feel terrible because they're not me first and they want to get to the finish line, as Mr. Pinard suggested. I think we need to keep in mind as a council that what we hear from operations and infrastructure, that every kilometre of new greenfield development does not pay for itself. And the more built up development that we see, the better it is for the health of our community. Dune South and even to some degree Pioneer Park area, Brigadoon, all of those areas right now are really challenged that we have minimal amenities, minimal ability to get to work without being car dependent. And I think we have to really keep that goal of a complete community in mind when we hear from the development industry saying, woe is me, woe is me. So I know that staff is trying diligently to keep that whole urban growth and keeping the growth management strategy and implementing it in the best way they can. But I think as a council, we also have to be cognizant of what we have to do when decisions are brought forward to us.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Last item on the agenda for today is item number 7, dealing with the noise exemption request for Frosh Circus Bigamans. And Mr. Turner is here to address any concerns or questions. Councillor Davey? No presentation. So I'm just going to bring in Mr. Turner because
Yeah, ready for questions, yes. I have a few questions on this. The first question is, what happens to the event if we were to turn down this exemption request?
Sorry, wrong mic.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, our ability is to put conditions on a noise exemption or to simply approve it or not approve it. We don't have the ability to stop the event. In the event that the event went forward and a noise exemption was not in place, that would mean that the event would be subject to noise enforcement, which would mean then if we received complaints and staff felt it was necessary, then charges would be laid pursuant to the bylaw.
Okay. And can I get an idea what the amount those charges might be?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, with this type of enforcement, the typical fine for a charge that's laid on the spot, so the ticketing type of scenario, the set fine is $300. However, the other approach that could be taken for a situation where there's a number of complaints in a neighborhood and staff decide to go a different route, they would be looking at a process that would involve a summons to court, and at that time the amount of the fine upon conviction would be subject to the discretion of the justice of the peace. The maximum fine for any situation under our noise bylaw is $5,000.
Okay, very good. So when I'm reading this report, the maximum fine, so I guess the next question would be, what would happen if there was a noise complaint at, say, midway through the event, and it didn't get any better? Is that $5,000 a maximum for the entire event for the day? Like, can they ignore the bylaw after that? Or has there been a case like that in the past?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the maximum fine under the bylaw is applicable for each charge that's laid.
Each charge that's laid. So once they get a notice that they've exceeded, or we're going to charge them, they have a set amount of time to, I guess, turn down the volume, and then we can charge them a second time on the same event?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that could happen. It's not typically our approach. Typically, we, first of all, we're typically able to get some compliance when under those types of scenarios, but the simple answer is yes, there could be multiple charges laid during the same event.
Okay. So the way this is structured then, if they exceed the 65 decibels, or if they break anything in this, in the recommendation, the moment, I guess, bylaw has the discretion to waive that based on the criteria, and then from that moment on, it would be as if they never had a noise exemption, they could be fined.
Councillor Davey, I forgot to mention to committee that section clause E is being switched with a document that you have in front of you.
Oh, pardon me.
Sorry about that.
I missed that. 1 second here.
No, you didn't miss it. I just forgot to tell you.
Okay, my question would be the same then. So supposing they break any of these, and as written here, it would render the noise exemption null and void, we could stop the noise exemption and then fine them as if they never had an exemption in the first place?
In simple terms, through you, Mr. Chairman, in simple terms, yes, that's correct.
Okay. Last question, I will have comments too after Mr. Chair. I'm not a sound engineer, so it says that the noise shall not exceed 65 decibels at 100 meters. The problem with these events in the past has been primarily the bass sounds. Do you know offhand, I guess, if that 65 decibels is as applicable to bass as it is to other higher frequency sounds?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, this is one of the challenges with this type of situation, in that the noise levels and the vibrations are sometimes measured differently. In order for us to establish a sound prediction model, we've engaged an acoustical engineering company to help us through this process, and then set a baseline for a sound prediction model going forward for future events. So the issue of the low frequency bass is something that's still under discussion with the event organizers, their sound people, and our company. So what we're hoping to do with the amended recommendation to Clause E is buy us a bit more time, since we're still going through that model. But the low frequency bass issue is certainly on the radar screen, and is something that's going to be built into the sound prediction model we're establishing.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Turner. In the past, Shane, I thought it was difficult, maybe impossible, to successfully measure decibel readings at special events. uncontrollable because of weather and other circumstances. Has that changed?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it's not so much that it's changed, it's that the types of models that are being applied now have adapted, and again, it's not an exact science in terms of having to predict what the weather conditions are. So there's still some uncontrollables, but the benefit that we have is that we found a company that we are now comfortable with in terms of helping us establish that sound prediction model. So therefore, we still have to understand that there will be some uncontrollable depending on the weather conditions. What we're hoping is that with the conditions we've put in place here, it will help us to establish a baseline for future events as well. So we're going to be monitoring this event closely.
But surely what is acceptable, unacceptable to your paid noise officer, who, by the way, only gets about $40 an hour, would be different from what I would tolerate or people complaining might tolerate. Am I correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what we're trying to do by establishing the decibel levels is take away the subjectivity. We found over the years that noise levels, or people have different tolerance levels to degrees of noise. So what we're trying to do here is minimize the officer discretion and establish a decibel level which we will have the equipment to monitor out in the field.
And do those levels match provincial, industrial decibel noise levels, unacceptable levels?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, our noise control bylaw is built on the basis of the Ministry of Environment guidelines. So certainly the acceptable levels within residential areas are something that's factored into the calculations. What we have to understand here is that because we're going through the noise exemption process, there has to be a tolerance for allowing a certain decibel level above what the norm would be. We call it the ambient levels. So if the event was going to take place and there's no impact on the ambient, then they would need a noise exemption. So it must be understood that this noise exemption process does factor in that there will be a certain level above the normal or the ambient in the residential. It's a question of determining what exactly that level of tolerance is.
Okay, thank you very much. I have some comment, Mr. Chair, later when it's time.
Okay. Mayor Verbanovich?
Actually, I'm fine.
Councillor Yaneski? Sorry, I clicked in Councillor Moore.
This event was held last year at about the same time, and there were complaints. What charges and fines were there incurred or placed last year on this event?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we were not able to issue any fines since the event last year was exempt from the noise control bylaw without a decibel level. That's the situation we're trying to adapt to this year.
Okay. Now, the proposed scenario you have here of having a noise level monitored or established as being an acceptable one in the industry, but let's say that level is established, but the noise still continues on and you get complaints, what are you going to do about that? Even though you could be still within the guidelines that you've established.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, like every other event that we approve noise exemptions for, if we get complaints but the noise exemption is in place and the event organizers have complied with all the conditions, no charges are available.
Sorry, what was the last part?
No charges are available. So we do not have the ability to lay a charge in a situation where an event organizer has complied with all the guidelines. And again, this comes down to determining what the level of tolerance is for outdoor special events.
Okay, and final question, who's going to monitor the offensive language?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as in previous events, that is a level of subjectivity that's given to our officers that are going to be on site.
Maybe certain words are acceptable and others aren't, depending on one's discretion, I guess?
That's correct, yes. We've had discussions with staff in previous events, and they're well aware of what can come out of some of these types of events, and that's what they're going to be listening for.
Thank you.
Councillor Marsh?
Thank you. So, based on what you've looked into regarding decibel levels, do you have a guesstimate as to how loud the party was when we had the big problems just in was it June?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the event was at absolutely the end of May, 1st of June, and because we didn't have the ability at that time to impose a condition on decibel levels, we weren't monitoring it. So to be quite honest, we don't actually have a reading to compare to.
Yeah.
A lot of the issues from that event were the low frequency base, which we also spoke about. So I don't have a baseline to compare. What we're doing is we're using the baseline of what's acceptable based on the Ministry of Environment standards in residential neighborhoods with that added level of tolerance.
Right. So one concern I have is that the complaints for that event just kept on rolling in, and I know that there was a staff person from that event organizer who was meant to respond to bylaw officers' concerns. So my assumption would be that they had asked them to turn it down, and then that it didn't get turned down low enough for the complaints to stop. So in this case, going forward, of course, we don't have anything to compare to. Like you're saying, we don't know what the decibel level is that could be acceptable. So we're going to just figure it out as we go. But can we include, what I would suggest is that we include in this recommendation is that we enable the staff person to require that they turn down the low frequency base and or the general volume to a lower level that would be more acceptable, so that is giving them the tools to do the job that we're asking them to do. Right now, the wording is quite vague to address any concerns raised. Well, they might say sorry, and that might be considered addressing the concerns. But we want action rather than just something more vague. So that's just my. Would you think that? Yeah. Can you comment on that suggestion?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I certainly understand Councillor Marsh's concern, and that's what we're trying to address by establishing that maximum decibel level. So we're going to work to establish that decibel level, communicate it to the event organizers, and also participate in sound checks the night before or the morning of the event to establish that standard so that we can take away that subjectivity of the officers. So by establishing that maximum decibel level measured from a predetermined distance, should give us that level of comfort then that if the event organizers, if the volume happens to exceed that level, we have the ability through the one recommendation that's already in the report to request that they lower the volume levels to that acceptable level immediately.
Thank you. So one last question, just regarding where the speakers will be pointing. My understanding is from the report is that we're going to be seeing the speakers not pointing towards the Lackner Woods neighborhood, which is, I'm sure, going to be music to their ears. But will it then be pointing more towards a different neighborhood? Will it be pointing towards Woolwich? Can you give us a sense of where the volume will be, where the music will be?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we've talked with the event organizers and their sound people, and they do absolutely recognize that there was challenges last year, and there's been challenges with similar events at Bingaman. So they've worked towards revising their site plan setup. So my understanding is that despite or regardless of where the stage will be centered, most of the speakers will be circling the event inwards. So there will not be one set of speakers specifically pointed in any one particular residential area.
There'll be lots of speakers, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Schneider.
These proactive procedures that you've put in place, are they based on the results of the experiences of last year's event?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes. Not just last year's event, but similar events of this nature in other venues as well.
Okay, and just to maybe help with this level of 65 dBA, is there something that you can compare that level to or illustrate the volume of that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it's a bit of a challenge. What I can tell you is that on a normal day in a residential neighborhood that's relatively close to, say, a main street like Victoria Street or King Street or whatever, the ambient temperatures are typically in the range of about 50 to 55 decibels. So, I mean, it's only a 10 decibel difference, but you have to understand that 1 or 2 decibels can be a significant, create a significant change. What we're hoping is that based on the plans we're putting in place and the not just with the sound layout, but also the stage layout, but also the decibel levels, that the buffer zone that's created by Victoria Street into the closest residential area should, we're hoping that the impact will be negligible in terms of what the residents would typically hear on a normal busy traffic day.
Okay, and this, this is obviously an ongoing experience, and this level of 65 dBA that we're setting for this event, is this something that could, if the complaints continue, be lowered to maybe a 60 or, as for further events, future events, sorry?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, the 65 dBA that was put in the report was a preliminary estimate, so we're now with a revised recommendation suggesting that we've got the ability to adjust that to whatever level is acceptable once we do the sound testing and such. So we'll be able to come back to council at a later date and advise through an email or a memo that this is what our experience has been. To your question, if this number 65 or any other number that we establish is not acceptable for future events, we have the ability to adjust that, certainly on an event-by-event basis. If your question specifically relates to if we find that a number is not appropriate for this particular event, the answer would be no, that we can't change it mid-event since it's a council action is required.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Just two quick questions. My first one, my sense is that the events like, not necessarily this one, but this one, when it was last year in the Ever After Music Festival that Councillor Marsh was referring to, in terms of absolute number of complaints, did we actually get more or less or the same than we have at Big Music Fest? Do you know offhand?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would say that it's safe to report that the number of complaints we received from the events at Binghamton's have been more than what we received at Big Music Fest.
Okay, and that puzzles me somewhat because obviously Big Music Fest is in a much more urban setting than Binghamton's. Can you speculate as to why that might be?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think a lot goes to preparing the neighborhoods in advancing and communicating to the neighborhoods. Certainly, we have a very specific targeted neighborhood impact around McLennan Park, so we can communicate. So, people within the residential areas around Big Music Fest were well aware of what to expect. The challenge with an outdoor event such as this one, particularly at Binghamton's, where it's quite a distance from residential, but is impacted by weather and such, it's very difficult to predict where that noise might land, and is therefore difficult to advise the neighborhoods in advance.
Okay. And last question, I touched upon it a bit earlier, but I just want to be clear then. So supposing someone was opposed to this event, it would make more sense to still approve the noise exemption because then at least we can put some conditions in place, whereas the event would likely occur anyway where we wouldn't be able to put any conditions in place. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's essentially correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have no further questions. Do we have a mover? Councillor Davey. And comments? And then we have Councillor Everything.
Sure. I'll just want to comment. First, I want to thank staff. I think that this is exactly the kind of response I think we needed to what's happened with Ever After and these particular folks back in 2014. It's a situation where it's, they did not adhere to, I think, what we would have liked to have seen the first time they had the event. So now we're coming down, I guess, with a hammer somewhat here, making sure that they do this time around. So I have moved it, and I will support it because it really does not take away our ability to waive the exemption if they do not follow the directions and still fine them and shape behavior in the future. So I hope I don't get as many phone calls this weekend as I have in the last couple, but I do appreciate staff's work here.
Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I get used to noise complaints in the Victoria Park area. I think overall we owe people a little weekend peace and quiet, particularly in the summer. And this particular event has a very dubious, very noisy record. I had complaints about this event because of obnoxious noise levels in my ward halfway across the city. I was going to vote against this, but after hearing Councillor Davey, the final reasoning there, I'm going to support the noise exemption and just say that I really welcome the fact that we're finally getting around to measuring this kind of noise, because believe me, it is it's uppermost in the minds of a lot of people in my ward.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And that concludes today's Community Infrastructure Service Committee. Thank you.